can find you if you like. Well, I'll tell you more. Don't let the day get the better of you. When the evening comes, there's so much to do. You better put on your best and wear a smile. Just come along with me a while, 'cause I tell you, I know a place where the music is fine and the lights are always low. I know a place where we can go. At the door there's a man who will greet you. Then you go downstairs to some tables and chairs. Soon I'm sure you'll be tapping your feet, because the beat is the greatest there. All around there are girls and boys. It's a swinging place, a cellar full of noise. It's got an atmosphere of its own somehow. You gotta come along right now, 'cause I tell you, I know a place where the music is fine and the lights are always low. I know a place where we can go. All around there are girls and boys. It's a swinging place, a cellar full of noise. It's got an atmosphere of its own somehow. You gotta come along right now, 'cause I tell you, I know a place where the music is fine and the lights are always low. I know a place where we can go. I know a place where we can go. I know a place where the lights are low. You're gonna love this place, I know. I know a place where we can go. I know a place where the
Hi everybody, it's Bill. Whoa, a little loud. It's Bill Whittle, and this is the Stratosphere Lounge, coming to you live from beautiful Sherman Oaks, in the land of the never the same video settings twice. But we're going to get that solved, because I think next show we will have our digital cameras up. Hi out there to everybody, and what a pleasure it was to have Animato there for the opening. I don't know how many times I've talked about it before, but we just get a lot of questions about where I came up with the idea for the Petula Clark song, and I'd never heard it before that little video came out. That is the one and only Mike Jitlove, and as I said before, I've talked about it before. I don't think I've ever played it before. He did all of that in 1979, and he did it frame by frame. You know, I think we could probably do that whole video in about a day today if we had his talent. Certainly with the tools we have, we could do it awful lot faster. But Mike did it frame by frame, and I saw it in 1979. I think I saw it projected against a wall, and I lost my mind. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. I was blown away by the first part, but as you got into the final third and he starts getting the moon up there and then all the space images, I just completely blew it. So that was really cool, and again, it's called Animato, A-N-I-M-A-T-O, and the one and only Mike Jitlove. If you get a chance to really see something really cool, look him up on YouTube and look up The Wizard of Time and Space, I want to say it is. Wizard of Space and Time. Stop motion animation like that. Out of the park, brilliant guy. And really a profound influence on me. So that was a pleasure to be able to do that. So again, ladies and gentlemen, Stratosphere Lounge episode 79. We've had some episodes, theme episodes, where we've had questions that I thought were good. But this one is the tough liberal questions edition of the Stratosphere Lounge. And I think with one or two exceptions, and they were mostly for grammatical or sort of, just sort of set up issues, I took every one of them. I took every single one of them. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages of them. So we'll do at least a two-parter and maybe a three-parter. Wizard of Speed and Time, not Space and Time. Wizard of Speed and Time. So we got a lot of ground to cover, I guess. Just a quick update. I've been out on the road for the last 2 weekends, and that is brutal. I had the best possible time. I was in Florida previous weekend, and then I was up in Bellingham, Washington yesterday, and Friday, and then Dallas for the AFP event in Dallas on Saturday, Americans for Prosperity. Did about an hour up in Washington, plus another half an hour in the evening with Bill Whittle, which was really a blast. They gave me a sense of what was going on up there, and they gave me a topic. Somebody pointed out my magic essay. So up in Friday night in Bellingham, I did about an hour on magical thinking, and then I got a chance to basically boil that down to about 22 minutes in Dallas the next day, and the 22 minutes I did in Dallas I think is the best 22 minutes I've ever done. So I'm going to just see if I can find a high-quality copy of that. Somebody got a copy up there, but I'm trying to see if I can get a high-def version, and I'll link to that or the one that's up there already. But, man, it was fun. It was just really, really fun. So we'll get that going. It's always nice to come back from the road and feel like you did a good job. But episode 79 and at least 80 and probably 81 is going to be the Tough Liberal Questions edition, which means we're going to be answering the questions that you guys post as sort of devil's advocate, the kind of questions you get all the time and you sometimes find maybe hard to answer. They're not really that hard to answer, for me anyway. I was looking at them and I'm thinking, boy, this is going to be tough, But they're not tough. In fact, none of them are tough when you get right down to it. So why don't we get going? I got a little tickle cough again. Oh, a quick update on the studio because everybody wants to know. We did get the banners. We're trying to get them mounted. I think you saw the still of the banners, so they're not up yet. Maybe next week, hoping to. Week after that, almost certainly. That's a 12-foot by 4.5-foot banner, and we got to get it up on the wall, and we got to get it backlit and all that other stuff. But it's coming along. We're almost there. So in any event, I had a great time in the last weekend, and everything else is pretty good. We might start shooting Time Over Target this coming week. I had these big travel dates ahead of me, and now they're behind me, so that's good sign. Excuse me. So here we go with episode 79, the Tough Liberal Questions edition of the Stratosphere Lounge. Starting with our friend Dave Olson, who wants to know, how can you be a conservative and a Republican when they have been the home of racism since Nixon's Southern strategy? Okay. We'll talk about the Republican part first. Republican Party was founded in 1855. And 1856 was the first presidential election for the Republicans. They were invented to stop slavery. The reason the Republican Party was founded was to stop slavery. That's why they're there. And they won their second election for the presidency in 1860 with Abraham Lincoln. And when Abraham Lincoln was elected, the South seceded before he took office. Before he was sworn in, the South was out of the Union because they knew a Republican president was the end of slavery. In 1864, the Democrats ran McClellan against Abraham Lincoln, and McClellan's position was the Union, the Constitution as it is, the Union as it was. In other words, hey, let's just say the whole thing never happened. Come on back, Confederacy, and bring your slaves with you. All of the Ku Klux Klan guys were all Democrats. The Jim Crow laws were written by Democrats. All of the lynchings and all the murders and stuff in the years after the Civil War during Reconstruction were done by Democrats. When you see those black children going to college, and you see the fire hoses and the police dogs being turned on them, those police dogs and fire hoses were being turned on them by Democrats. So as long as we have that part of it understood, we can talk about what happened next. The history of racism on the part of Democrats is so shameful that they have to invent some kind of little piece of prestidigitation and magic and sophistry. What they basically say was somewhere back in the 60s and 70s, the two teams changed sides. Because God knows that's what I'm going to do if I'm up 70-0 at halftime. If I'm beating Florida State and I'm the Gators and we're up 70-0 at halftime, the thing I want to do is go into the locker room and switch jerseys. No one's ever made any sense of that statement other than they say it. And as if that's the end of it and as if that were true. But it's not true. So what happened? Why did the Republican Party go from being the party of black America? Why did Frederick Douglass say that the Republican Party was the anchor of the hope of the black race? And why was Martin Luther King a Republican? And why did all this stuff happen? What happened? Well, what happened is not that Nixon decided, you know what, I'm going to appeal to Southern racists. What happened was, we can do a little math now, liberals, who came before Nixon? Did Nixon precede Johnson or did Johnson precede Nixon? Johnson was president before Richard Nixon. You can look it up on Wikipedia. And President Johnson basically said, I'm going to have those N-words voting Democratic for the next 200 years. And he didn't say N-words either. What actually happened in the South was Johnson decided to buy the black vote. And he decided to buy the black vote with entitlements. And when Johnson decided to buy the black vote with entitlements, that was the end of the conservative idea, of the Republican idea of black people being free. It was the end of them being free. The first black senators and black representatives were Republicans. The first black Speaker of the House was a Republican. They were elected right after the Civil War. And they were brought into mainstream America through the principle of Booker T. Washington, the idea that black America would come in as economic equals through hard work and they wouldn't have to beg for respect, they'd earn respect, they would come in as equals. And when Lyndon Johnson in the 60s gave away billions of dollars to black America in the form of entitlements to buy the black vote, then the black vote migrated to where the free candy was, and the Republican Party said, this is not what we had in mind. This is not freedom, this is not the kind of future for black America that not only Frederick Douglass imagined, but Martin Luther King didn't want that kind of future, and neither did Booker T. Washington. Those three great black leaders, Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, and Martin Luther King, understood that the only way for black America to ever belong and to be a part of the American experience was to come in as equals, and to come in not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That is essentially exactly what Booker T. Washington's position was with black America. That's what he asked of people and demanded of people in the Tuskegee Institute. That's why black students in the Tuskegee Institute were outscoring white students, and it's also why black students at Tuskegee had a better legitimacy rate. They had fewer out-of-wedlock births than the white average, because Booker T. Washington, like Frederick Douglass, and like Martin Luther King, said that if we decide to make this about entitlement, race, and dependency, it's game over. Game over. So, this idea that Nixon suddenly said, "Ooh, let's appeal to all the racists," that doesn't make any sense. The racists were Democrats. They were Democrats in the beginning. Lyndon Johnson basically said, well, we're going to buy black people. We're going to own them outright. We're going to own them outright with all these entitlement programs, and we're going to make them dependent on us, and we're going to have them voting for us for 200 years. So he did, and they did. Next question. Randy Schnick wants to know, are we creating more terrorists with our endless wars? So glad you brought that up, Randy. This is something you often hear. Somebody punches you in the nose, let's say. You punch them back. Are you creating more bullies? Are you creating more bullies with this, perpetuating the cycle of violence? This idea that you create enemies by fighting the enemies that are already there. In other words, there's 10 terrorists out there and they've just killed half of our people. Let's go kill those people. All you're doing is making new terrorists. What that is this highest form of arrogance, really. This is that mirroring that I talked about occasionally. Mirroring is the idea that everybody else out there thinks the same way we do. And when you say something like that, what you're really saying is that the people who become terrorists aren't real people. They're just automatons. They're like reflections of us, pale reflections of us. Whatever we do, they react to. They're not real people, don't have their own agendas, don't have their own desires, don't have their own needs or history or culture or anything. No, they just react to what we do. So if we would just leave them alone, they wouldn't want to hurt us. If we didn't hit them back, they wouldn't come back at us, and so on. You can apply the same stupid argument to anybody in history. So by that reasoning, Randy, are we creating more terrorists with our endless wars? Shouldn't we just stop fighting? Why not apply that to the Nazis? If we invade the European continent on D-Day and we go in and bomb German cities and kill German soldiers, aren't we just going to create new Nazis? Aren't we going to just create another generation of Germans who hate us and want to kill us? Maybe. Didn't pan out that way. You can undoubtedly say that when you put a fleet of American bombers over Berlin and you bomb Berlin, is that going to engender a lot of hate towards America? Yes, it is. But guess what? We're already at war by this point, right? We didn't start this. We didn't start any of them. We didn't start any of these wars. We didn't even start the Iraq war, despite what people say. That was just a break in the ceasefire that Saddam Hussein basically been violating for 13 years when we decided to go at it. It doesn't make any sense to say, aren't we creating terrorists by these endless wars? No, we're not. We're fighting terrorists. This is also kind of the same thing as saying, don't we create criminals by enforcing the law? Number one, assuming that it does. It doesn't matter. You still have to enforce the law. Secondly, when you talk about these kind of things, the reason this thing goes this way is because we don't ever fight these wars to win anymore. When you fought Germany or Japan, Japan's a great example. You had an entire nation that was all ginned up with all these guys who were on fire, running around with their hair on fire, and they're trying to, they think they're the master race. So they look at America and they see us as a bunch of lazy, fat, stupid, happy, prosperous people. And so they attack Pearl Harbor and they don't think they're going to have a fight. They think we're going to basically say, well, you sunk our battleship. I guess you win. You can have the Western Pacific. Just, stay away from the coast. And as it turned out, we decided to get back into this fight. And in the end of it, we killed all of their fire breathers. Virtually every airman that went on the Pearl Harbor raid by the end of the war was dead. Virtually every single one of the aviators that were in the attack on Pearl Harbor were dead by the end of the war. We killed all their fighters. And what we also did in Japan was we hurt that civilian population so much that they said, okay, it's over. We're done. I would rather surrender than get more of this. And as I've said 100 times on this show, there's only one proven model for turning enemies into friends, and that is you have to beat them into submission. You have to beat them into submission. You have to beat them into submission to the point where they are ready to accept anything from you. They've been told by their rulers that you're going to come and rape them and murder their children and throw their kids over the river and all that other stuff. That's what they were told about American soldiers. We're going to rape all the women. We're going to beat the children to death. We're going to take the men out back and shoot them. And that's what the Russians did. And that's what the Germans did. And that's what the Japanese did. But it's not what we did. What we did was instead of doing that, once they'd surrendered and realized that nothing was worse than more war, then we helped them to their feet. But we only helped them to their feet after they surrendered. We only helped them to their feet after we'd killed those war-crazy kamikaze lunatics who had basically perverted this entire idea of Bushido and turned it into Japanese militarism. You have to beat them first, and then you can help them up. You can make the same kind of case with the Civil War. I don't know how much helping up there was. Lincoln basically said, let him up easy. Lincoln didn't want any recriminations against the South. Lincoln didn't want anything like what happened in Reconstruction. Lincoln wanted to just have Jefferson Davis and the rest of them just leave the country. And the South was beaten. My favorite story about this comes from a general, Confederate general who's not widely known compared to Robert E. Lee anyway, or Stonewall Jackson. But Joseph Johnson was a guy who ran the Eastern Campaign for a while, was wounded. Lee took over Army of Northern Virginia. Lee made it into the Army of Northern Virginia. Johnson moved out west, and Johnson did a lot of the fighting against Sherman. So Johnson is one of the stars of the Confederacy. He's one of the major players of the Confederacy. And after the Civil War, he was on a steamboat. And one of these young guys who was never in battle, they said, kind of guy who was always talking about battle, but you never saw in battle, was making a lot of noises a year or two after the Civil War was over. Making a lot of noise about how we weren't really defeated and the South's going to do it again. And the Confederacy was never beaten. And Johnson, who fought the war as one of the greatest generals in that war, turned to this young man. He said, young man, I don't know who you are, but I was in the Civil War, and I don't know about you, but I was beaten. Okay. So That's what you have to do. So to the degree that you make more terrorists because you don't kill all the terrorists. You got to defeat them, and then you let them up. And people say this kind of thing all the time, and my answer is, there used to be Barbary pirates. We used to be plagued by Barbary pirates. The Barbary pirates took some significant percentage of the national budget in the early days of this country, and finally we decided we're getting a little tired of it, so we went over there, and we sent the Navy over there, and we engaged the Barbary pirates, and we didn't create more Barbary pirates. We killed the Barbary pirates. Pretty much the end of that story right there. So this is just another way to justify your moral cowardice and your unwillingness to deal with the fact that there are people out there who don't like you and want to kill you. Do we really have to fight them? Don't we just create more enemies? No. No, we don't. This idea that they're just innocent people on a picnic, and suddenly an American airstrike happens, suddenly they're radicalized Muslims. No, the people we're fighting are radicalized Muslims, and we killed. People say, what happened to Al Qaeda? I mean, ISIS is a resurgence of the philosophy. But what happened to Al Qaeda? Al Qaeda's dead. Al Qaeda's dead in the sands of Iraq. Barack Obama didn't kill Al Qaeda. George Bush, the U.S. Marine Corps, the United States Army, Air Force, Navy, killed Al Qaeda in Iraq. And in 2005, when Zarqawi was saying, "Send us all the reinforcements you've got, Osama, because these Marines are not the hot tub sitting, Chardonnay sipping Americans that you told us we were going to get." And then he got a couple 500-pound bombs for his pleasure too. They're dead in the sands of Iraq instead of in shopping malls in America. So no, we didn't go over there and create new Al-Qaeda fighters. We took 40, 50,000 Al-Qaeda fighters who thought we were finished, thought we were the weak horse. They sent them into Iraq. We went into Iraq too, and our guys kicked the living crap out of their guys. That's what actually happened. Laura Giacconi says, don't you need to check your privilege? That's really, she's got a paragraph there, but that's really it. I'm so glad we got this one. So let's talk about me checking my privilege, my white skin privilege. My white skin privilege that opens so many doors for me and closes so many doors for other people. This white skin privilege of mine that gives me all these unseen advantages and this institutionalized racism that may not even be operated by anybody. It's just built into the system and it's insurmountable. If you believe this drivel, then as I've thought about it more and more and more, I realize there is in fact a privilege. I am privileged. It's a privilege that it wasn't caused by my white skin. It has nothing to do with my white skin, but it is a privilege. And my privilege that I'm not going to check is pretty simple. It's my attitude. My privilege is my attitude. My privilege is that I was raised to believe that I could do anything I want to. And a black child who's raised to believe he can do anything he wants to, or a woman, or a homosexual, or anybody else that's born with that same privilege will in fact be able to go out and do pretty much anything they want to. And if I had been born with parents who had told me that no matter what you do, you're going to fail, that other people are the cause of all your problems, that all of these people who've tried to block you and get in your way are the reason you're not succeeding, then that would be my anti-privilege. White skin privilege is what losers use to justify their own failures, period. Everybody understand? This whole idea of institutionalized racism is what losers use to justify their own failures to themselves. It's the philosophy of failure. It's a philosophy of failure. I didn't get all these advantages. Stop. Just stop right now. If you are actually trying to tell me that in 2013, a black child, a black teenager and a white teenager applying for jobs, applying for college benefits, applying for government grants, applying for anything, you're trying to tell me a white kid has an advantage over this kid? Really? Honestly? No. It's just not true. White privilege is an invention of lazy people to justify their failures. It's just that simple. And I know people don't like to hear it, but it's the truth. when you face the fact that your own success or failure is a product of your own actions, then you're free and you will succeed. And no one is going to tell me that a black person with a hard work attitude, and that is their only attitude, is an attitude to hard work, that person's going to own companies in half the time it takes for white people to do it, because of the fact that not only is there not a white skin privilege, there is and has been for 30, 40, 50 years now, an effort on the part of white America to bend over backwards to help black people. Bend over backwards. But no, we keep hearing it's about our institutionalized racism and our white skin privilege. I do have a privilege, and the privilege is up here. It's got nothing to do with my skin. The best way I ever heard this put was by a brain surgeon, extremely capable, extraordinarily wealthy individual who really summed it up. And his name is Ben Carson. And Ben Carson said, yes, I have a couple of houses, and yes, I have some nice cars, and yes, I have a ton of money. And he said, you could take all of it away from me tomorrow. I said, I'd have it all back again in a year because of what's up here. And I gasped. I didn't gasp because there's a black doctor saying something like that. I gasped. I just sat back and just went, wow, because that's as perfectly put as I've ever heard it before. And we all know he's right. I know he's right. You know he's right. The people who are talking about white skin privilege know he's right. They all know he's right. Oh, well, he doesn't count because he's really brilliant and really smart and so on. He came from poverty. And so did Herman Cain, and so did all these other people. They're not exceptions. They're not flukes. They're not like fish that manage to escape this net. They're the few people that actually apply this when it is so much easier and so much more satisfying to blame your problems on somebody else. You know, there are people in you don't see it so much anymore, but certainly in the years after the Confederacy fell, there are a lot of people, a lot of white people sitting around saying this is all black people's fault. There are a lot of Irish that say it's all the British fault. There's a lot of Pakistanis who say it's all the Indians' fault. There's a lot of Chinese who say it's the Japanese fault. There's all of this all the time. And this idea is convenient. And it's especially convenient nowadays for millennials who have no skills, no work ethic, no talent, no idea how to do anything. They got to have some explanation for why they're not going anywhere and living in their parents' garage. It's because of white skin privilege. Screw you. It's because of white skin privilege. And if you want to really go to the heart of this, I'll go even further. Sometimes you'll hear people say that, well, you don't know what it's like to be followed around in a store because you're black. That's true, I don't. I don't know what that's like. But what you don't realize is that that is not white skin privilege. What that is that is the consequence of bad black behavior. It's just, face it. It's true that it would suck. It would suck if you were, as most black people are, perfectly law-abiding, honest citizens. But when you find that 11% of the population commits 50, 60% of the crime and some insane amount of the robberies and shoplifting, and when your entire black culture is based on things like, F the police and bitches ain't shit, and when you glorify it, and when the statistics are there, and statistics have like a word like, oh, it's just statistics. No, when the daily actions are, that's what's happening. If it were me, I wouldn't be angry with white people. I'd be angry with my own black people. That's who I'd be angry with if it turned out that white conservatives were murdering people way out of proportion to our numbers, and white conservatives were stealing right out of proportion to my numbers, and all of a sudden I started getting followed around in a store because I was a white conservative. I wouldn't be angry at black America or women or liberals. I would be angry at other white conservatives for doing this and bringing this down on me because it's reasonable for people to assume that. That's what I would be doing. I would be ashamed of my people. I'd be ashamed of my peer group, and I would be really dedicated and motivated to do something about it. And everybody knows this is true. Everybody knows it's true, but nobody will say it. It's true. It's true. You are responsible for your own life. And ultimately, when you get down to this idea of white skin privilege, it flies against my entire idea of what people are. Because if Mitt Romney had made this case, or if a Republican ever decides to want to try to win an election someday, maybe what you might want to say is what I've said when I'm doing this kind of campaigning thing. And that is that the Democrats and the progressives divide the country up into tribes and special interest groups and fill people full of rage and envy. My feeling is that a black business owner, a Hispanic business owner, a gay business owner, and a female business owner have a lot more in common as business owners than they do as blacks with other blacks, gays with other gays, women with other women, or Hispanics with other Hispanics. Our entire theory of government, our entire theory of life, our entire theory of morality is based on individual responsibility. Individual responsibility. So when people say, well, what do you think of Black America, Bill? My response is, who are we talking about? Which person are we talking about? Do blacks commit a lot more crimes than proportional? Yeah, of course they do. Does that mean all blacks are criminals? No. Not only does it mean all blacks are criminals, it doesn't even mean most of them are criminals. Most of them aren't. And because of this nonsense of white skin privilege and all this crap, what really happens, the end result, put aside all the smoke and mirrors and all the rest of it, the end result of this kind of thinking on the part of these progressive D-bags is that the honest, hard-working, law-abiding black people in this country, of which the great majority is, end up in ghettos with this outrageous crime rate, surrounded by children who are being shot on the street, and all of this is it's not inflicted on us, it's inflicted on them. The great irony of all this is that it's this progressive defending of these absolutely criminal and appalling behaviors that not only allows them to continue, but encourages them to continue. And who pays the price for this liberal douchebaggery? Black America does. Black America does. That's why South Central is such a mess. It's such a mess because people will not accept the fact that this is intolerable behavior and it needs to be stopped. If Black America, Black leadership, I should say, were to come out and say, we're not going to tolerate crime in our neighborhoods anymore, then you'd have a chance to solve this problem. But when they say, oh, no, this is all the result of white people's white skin privilege, and you're basically saying it's okay. You know, black kid gets shot by a policeman, we'll call it rebellion against this white skin privilege, but really it's just a pass to go and get some rims. It's really what it is. You got about a week, better hurry. So this is what it comes down to, folks. Once again, it's these liberal progressive policies that cause all this poison and pain. And when you get back down to it, you cannot escape the example of Booker T. Washington, one of the greatest Americans who ever lived, who demanded accountability and effort from Black America. And not only did he get enough of it, he got more than he needed. He got more than the white community was delivering on average. That's what happens when you treat people like adults and individuals. I don't blame Black America one bit for being disgusted or not willing to talk about Booker T. Washington, because Booker T. Washington and the Tuskegee Institute and the Tuskegee Airmen and all that other stuff is the evidence that they're wrong. But just in the same way that wishful thinking is handy or magical thinking is handy, it's nice to think magically about problems. It's much easier to think magically about something than it is to go out and build a power plant or a bridge that requires work and effort and schooling and so on. So there you go. Moving on. Zechariah Tiemann says, if conservatism works so well, why are southern red states so poor? Well, there's a tremendous underclass of black people in the southern red states, Mississippi and so on. I have appalling large populations of these people who are dependent on this idea. They're just dependent on the idea, not just of aid from white people, they're dependent on the idea of aid from the government. I don't know what else to say about it. There's when you look at Louisiana, for example, And what happens when a Republican governor gets in there? It goes from having a budget deficit to having a budget surplus, goes from having low test scores to high test scores, goes from having high crime to low crime, does all of these things. So why is it that you keep seeing this kind of stuff? I don't know. I don't know why. I just suspect it's just products of generations and generations of dependency on government. And there it is. The southern states, when we talk about the southern red states, we're really talking about this, what was it, 4 or 5, right? We're really talking about Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama in some cases, and so on. To some degree, these states are still suffering from the Civil War. You know, I'm not trying to say they're still victims of the Civil War. What I'm trying to say is, not many people know this, but in 1863-64, during the height of the Civil War, the Confederacy had less manufacturing ability than New York City. The entire Confederacy produced less material goods than New York City. They have always been an agrarian society and very slow to pick up industrial development. Now, we're out of the industrial age. And so nowadays you start to see some things that are happening for in information age stuff, which can basically happen anywhere. But the Deep South has always suffered a great deal from a lack of industry. And listen, as a person who's lived in Florida, and I know South Florida is not the South. If you live in Miami, you have to drive north to get to the South. But I lived in Gainesville and saw outside of Gainesville. I spent some time in the SEC. I know what the Deep South is. I don't know if there's anything to this, but since you asked, I have to tell you, when you live in a climate where 9 months out of the year, by 9:30 in the morning, it's 98 degrees out there and 98, 99, 100% humidity beating down on you, that doesn't motivate me to roll up my sleeves and get to work. I really want to know how much the actual climate, which is so unbelievably oppressive down there, has to do with motivation and work. I can tell you this, I am more motivated to get more work done, me personally, when I'm cold. And when you live in a state where if you don't plan ahead and set aside and plan for the future, then you're going to freeze to death. Then you get into all the cultural habits and all the cultural norms and so on and so forth. You know, people talk about Africa and why it's so poor. But Africa, one of the main reasons Africa's so poor is because they live in a giant meat locker, and you can go out and get the food you need to get every day. As a matter of fact, there's no reason to go out and get food for 6 months if you live in Africa, because there's no way to store the meat, even if you did it. On the other hand, if you live in Northern Europe as a Neanderthal, if you don't plan 6 months ahead or 8 months ahead, and you're living in France during the Ice Age, or Germany or Scandinavia or something, if you don't plan 6 months ahead, then you're out of the gene pool. So I actually think there's a lot of climatic reasons that have to do with the South underperforming economically. But, you know, I mean, there it is. I don't think, when I think of Mississippi, I don't immediately come to this place of hard-working Lutheran Protestant work ethic. I remember who it was. It was somebody not too long ago. It might have been Colin Powell, but I'm not sure. It's been a while. But some Secretary of State, I want to say, it was some government official had was showing, it was either the Prime Minister or some visiting official from either Norway or Sweden. I know this is about as vague as it gets, but the point is correct, right? Some American official showing around some Scandinavian official. And some Scandinavian official said, you know, in Sweden, we have very successful people, we have a very low crime rate, and we have a very high work ethic. And this person said, among Swedes in America, we have a very high level of education, very high work ethic, and very low crime rate as well. So, you know, it comes the way it comes. Anyway, and by the way, conservatism, if conservatism works so well, why are southern states so poor? Conservatism in this case is an economic policy rather than a political statement. So the economic policy of capitalism and free market and small business and so on has never particularly been gigantically huge in the southern states, although obviously that's changing these days. Dave Olson says, our air is cleaner because of auto emission regulations. Our water is cleaner because of federal mandates. And several species like the bald eagle, our national symbol, have been brought back from the brink of extinction because of acts of Congress. Why are you right-wingers always against the EPA and all the good they've done and all the good they can still do, like stopping global warming? There's two different questions there, and we'll pull the global warming question out because we'll deal with that in a minute. This is a great example, and liberals use this all the time. Listen, people who call themselves liberals today are not liberals in the real sense of the word. So I'm going to just go through a quick definitional thing. The idea of liberal is somebody who liberates something. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and Monroe and Madison were classical liberals. They believed in private property. They believed in individual rights and responsibility. They believed in limits on power. Those are classically liberal ideas. Modern liberals don't believe in any of these things. Why do conservatives believe in these things? Well, because these classically liberal ideas have been under attack and have been so out of fashion for a while that now those of us who are classical liberals feel the need to conserve these things. So we're conservatives. We conserve liberalism, real liberalism, not this big state tyranny that modern liberals fall in love with. So let's talk about the EPA. Look, I've dealt with this before, and it's really critical to understand this. When the EPA is pulling mercury out of the river and putting limits on emissions so that the jet airplanes are not leaving black smudges behind them and trying to get the air breathable, then I'm all for the EPA. I'm all for it. As long as what it's doing is increasing human awesomeness, then I'm in favor of the EPA, and the same thing goes for feminism, and the same thing goes for gay rights and all this other stuff. But where we find ourselves now, and have for quite a long time, we found ourselves past the peak. We're past the top of that hill of increasing awesomeness against increasing activism. So if you want to think of a bell curve, as we start to clean up the environment with the EPA and the environment gets cleaner and cleaner and life gets better and better, then sign me up. You want to call me a liberal? That's great. On the left side of that hill, I'm a blue guy. I'm a liberal. Yeah, it's awesome. We've taken stuff out of the air, saving bald eagles. Fantastic. But once the rivers have been cleaned, and once the air has been cleaned, and once the bald eagles have been saved, and once all of this stuff has been done, does the EPA say, well, we did what we were brought here to do. Thank you very much. And if you need us again, you'll know where to find us, but we're going to shut the agency down now with these existing regulations. No, it does not do that. What it does is it continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger and more money and more budgets and more entitlements and more of these things for itself. It's a government agency. It can't be killed. It's immortal. So as the EPA continues past the point of maximum good, you get this asymptotic result thing where now we have to spend more and more energy, more and more money, more and more effort, more and more time to do less and less and less and less and less. Why? Because the big things are already done. The big, important, easy things, well, not easy, the important things are already done. So instead of just saying, finished, let's go home, they now have to find a way to justify what they do. And so the EPA now does dumber and dumber and dumber stuff, and they spend more and more money and more effort, more and more everything, more and more tyranny, more and more oppression, more and more regulations, permits, and stuff to accomplish progressively less and less and less and less and less because it's asymptotic now. So, as with the case of feminism, which in the beginning stages of feminism, needless to say, as it's increasing awesomeness, you want to call that liberal on the left side of that curve? Fine. You want to call me a blue guy? Then fine. In favor of women voting? I've given it some thought. On balance, I think it's probably a good idea. Equal pay for women? Obviously. Equal rights for women? Obviously. Equal property rights for women? Obviously. We're all in favor of this. You don't get to say you're better than me because you're in favor of it, because I'm not opposed to it. But when you get to a point where women have equal pay, equal rights, equal property benefits, equal everything, and then you start to continue with this movement and you continue to push more and more and more to get little less, then when you start saying, well, you have to tear down those lovely seats in the boys' baseball stadium because the girls' softball stadium is not raising enough money and that's not fair. That is time to not only stop where you are and conserve where you've been, it's time to back up. It's time to say, no, things were making a little more sense when we were talking earlier. This is not feminism. This is not protecting women's rights. This is not making things equal. This is punitive now. This is damaging. And the EPA is exactly the same way. Now the EPA will charge you they'll charge you $40,000 for a permit to do something in your own private property that not only doesn't degrade the environment, but may actually improve the environment. And you're going to have to stop and pay for that. And the next firewall I shot it yesterday. I've got one coming out this week about President Coward and his inability to rescue these hostages because he didn't want to look bad. But after that, I've got something called tie-dye tyranny. And basically, you learn in Washington State, for example, that this guy put a pond in his property, his private property, put a pond in as a wildlife wetlands refuge. Little pond on private property. The EPA and all the fisheries people came out and said he didn't divert any streams, he didn't cause any damage. It is nothing but a net gain for the environment on his private property with his own dime. But the EPA and other environmental people like that have said, no, you didn't get a permit, so therefore you have to fill the pond in, and you have to use our specially approved preferred consultants and pay them to fill your pond in. Once you fill in this pond that never did any damage and was nothing but a plus, once that pond has been filled in according to these environmental regulations, then you can apply for a permit. Then you can put the exact same pond in the exact same place on the exact same piece of property, and swell, we'll probably give you a grant to help you do it. That's not about the environment, and it's not about cleaning things up. It's about power and money and control. And that's what the EPA is now. They're a self-serving monstrosity. They're not saving the bald eagle anymore or the California condor. They're not even trying to save the Delta smelt, which is essentially a sardine. What they're basically doing is they are enforcing the will of a small group of extremely rich elitists, and they're shutting down the entire agriculture of the state of California in order to meet a moral agenda of people who want to brag at cocktail parties. Somebody mentioned Penn and Teller in the comments section here. They're talking about, I only saw one of them, BS, they use the actual words. But basically, Penn and Teller looked at this idea of recycling and landfills. And it turned out that the whole idea of landfills being a problem was a result of one guy. One guy. And everybody said, oh my God, we've got a landfill problem. We have to recycle. I think Penn and Teller showed that, I think with the possible exception of aluminum, it actually takes more energy and hurts the environment more to recycle than it does to just put the stuff out in a big hole. And I found out from this trifecta episode that these giant continent-size islands of plastic that are floating out in the ocean, I've often heard about them, and it wasn't until recently I thought, how come I haven't seen any pictures of these? I haven't seen any pictures of them because they don't exist. Turns out these continent-sized islands of floating plastics, which is why I can't have a plastic bag anymore in Sherman Oaks, don't really exist. Because imagine, plastic gets in the ocean, it's subjected to ultraviolet light, and it breaks down like it's supposed to. This guy who came up with this idea of these floating islands of plastic I had thought it would be 20,000 scientists and oceanographers and so on. No, one guy. One guy made the assertion, and everybody believed him. This one woman made the assertion about DDT with Silent Spring. I've forgotten her name right now. And DDT is banned because one person wrote a novel that wasn't true. And millions and millions and millions of poor people die every year because rich liberals read a book that was fiction about something that didn't happen, and everybody panicked, and everybody banned DDT, and now millions of Africans die every year because they die of malaria or other insect-based diseases. But the main thing to remember is that the elitists in the hills of Rachel Carson, thanks, the elitists in the Hollywood Hills get to go to their cocktail parties and act better than you. So it doesn't really matter if 20 million Africans die from malaria. The important thing is that Harvey Weinstein and Barbara Streisand get to act superior at a cocktail party. That's what really matters. And that's the same thing with the environmental movement today. When the environmental movement is pulling mercury out of the river, I'm all for it. But the Great Lakes used to be toxic pits of liquid. There wasn't a fish in them. Now there's fish in the Great Lakes again. The Ohio River caught fire when Dennis Kucinich was mayor. Doesn't catch fire anymore. There used to be blue puffs of smoke that came out of every single car that was idling, and those are gone. There's no smog in LA anymore, folks. I hate to break this to you, but it's really true. Those days don't exist in LA anymore. There are no longer days where you can't see that there are mountains out there. They're gone. So you don't get to say, how come you conservatives don't like that stuff? We do like that stuff. When we talk about the EPA, we're not talking about saving the bald eagle. When we talk about the problem with the EPA is we talk about you are going to tell people what to do on their private property because of a subset of gophers that have a, well, I'll save it for the firewall. It's past the peak. Conservatives are kings of the hill. They say, yes, this was good, and this was good, and this was good, but you're doing too much of it, and it's time to stop, and it's time to actually back up. What's the matter with you? Can't you see this thing? It's so obvious. But no, they don't. So it's another trick they use. And it's, yeah, you in favor of rivers being cleaned? Yes. Are you in favor of shutting down agriculture because of a sardine? No. And you wouldn't be either. And the reason you want all these green things is great. And you want all this green stuff, but you still go home in your car, which runs on oil and refined petroleum, and you turn on your electricity, which has to be generated with either coal or nuclear or oil, and you just want to pontificate, but you don't want to pay the price. You want to live in a world without refineries, but you still want to drive your car. You want to live in a world without power plants, but you still want to come home at the end of the day, turn on your stereo and your big screen TV and sip Chardonnay in your hot tub. It's crud. It's not true. One or the other. Joshua Lazoya says, don't we need some sensible gun control laws? We don't want people walking around with automatic weapons or driving around in tanks. Says who? What is a sensible gun control law? Why do we have to have them? And why do we need all of these things? So let's just look at this from a starting point of view. If we need gun control laws because people die from gun violence, then we need food control laws because people die of obesity. We need drunk driving laws because people die of drunk driving accidents. We need all kinds of dietary control laws to limit heart disease. We need anti-smoking laws because people die of smoking. We need laws to ban knives because knives kill more people than assault rifles, and clubs do too. We need to limit people's access to the outdoors because people drown or people are killed by wildlife or people die of starvation or people die of exposure when they get lost out on the trails. We need to put safety helmets on everyone, and we need to rope off every large body of water, and we need to have everything absolutely constricted and controlled because people can get hurt out there. So if you're just going to make the case that we have to punish people who are not committing crimes because other people who do commit crimes have consequences, then the only answer is to keep everybody in the basement, which is what they really want. They want everybody controlled, managed, on pre-approved trails with safety helmets and all the rest of it. So, sensible gun control laws. What are sensible gun control laws? Well, a sensible gun control law might be if a person has committed a felony and is shown through his actions that he's not capable of functioning in society and has no restraints on his behavior, maybe we shouldn't let that person own a gun. Oh, wait, that's already a law, isn't it? I think it is, as a matter of fact. I think it is a law that says that if you show through your actions that you cannot be trusted as a member of society, maybe we shouldn't let you have guns. That law exists already. Who knew? Who knew? That's a sensible gun control law. As far as people driving around in tanks goes, there's, believe it or not, a fair number of Americans own tanks. A lot of people don't know how many guys own tanks. I bet there's scores, if not hundreds of them out there. I think I've seen one case where a guy went on a rampage in a tank. I don't think it was the guy that owned the tank. So is this really a problem that we're going to have? Or is this just more hyperbole designed to get people to shut up? Do we really, if we say we don't want controls on our handguns, this is really going to lead to a epidemic of people driving in tanks? And I'll go further than that. If your government is determined to come after you with tanks, and as we see the police being more and more militarized, if the government's coming after you with tanks, then I am 100% in favor of private tank ownership for citizens. 100%. So this business about, what does that mean everybody should be able to drive a tank? I never really thought about driving a tank before, but if the government is going to be armored up with tanks, and they're going to use tanks not against enemy soldiers, but against American citizens, then I think every American should have a right to keep and bear tanks. I want to be able to defend myself, not just against a guy with a switchblade, but against anybody that's coming to harm me or my family. So, yeah, I'd open carry a tank if that's what we're going to have to be looking at. Look, this is why we're having this discussion in the first place. The ownership of weapons does two things. It protects your life against criminals, and there's no question that's the case. And it also makes the tyrants who desire to tell other people what to do and who always go into government to control other people's lives because they have a genetic defect. There's something wrong with them. They're not happy unless they're telling other people what to do. It's not like they want to live this way. It's not like they want to live with a low carbon footprint, recyclable future. That's fine. They can do whatever they want to. But they have to make other people do it too. And they have to make them wear the helmets. And they have to make them limit their sodas. And they can't be fat. And they can't smoke, can't do anything that they don't want them to do. Those people have a problem. They're genetic defects. They've got a severe mental illness in terms of telling other people what to do. I don't mind that those people are out there as long as they mind their own business, but they don't. So if these people come at us with guns to try to get us to do what they want us to, we should have guns to defend ourselves against them. If they come at us with tanks, then we ought to start thinking about getting some tanks. If they decide to use nuclear weapons on the American people, then American people should have nuclear weapons to defend themselves against their government. It sounds silly, but it's not silly at all. Let me tell you something, folks, about this gun control issue. You really need to read about the Soviet Union, how it was formed, and what it did to its own people. I have never been more horrified in my life. The Nazis don't do this to me. When you look at the randomness, at the ease where people in that thing could say, that is not a true Bolshevik. That guy is counter-revolutionary. And not just him, his children, his wife, his grandparents, every single one of them, down in the basement of the Lubyanka, shot in the back of the head. That is the one thing in the world to fear, because who do you call if your government has come to kill you? Who do you call if the government's coming to kill you? And liberals look at this and go, say, that could never happen in America. How could you? What do you mean it could never happen in America? What makes you say that it could never happen in America? We're made out of the same stuff as anybody else. It's true that we have an attitude about this, but that's the attitude that's keeping us afloat. So you have to be able to look. You can actually really reduce it to something even simpler than that. I don't want tanks. I don't want to have to own a tank so that I can fight my government that owns a tank. If I have to own a tank to convince the government that it ain't going to happen, that they don't have a chance, then that's the win. We have to be able to protect ourselves against the idea that they can get away with it here. And so the more armored up we are and the more ammoed up we are, the better our chances of it not happening. You ask any liberal who has an opinion about guns should not be allowed. Really? No. You shouldn't carry a gun then for yourself? I would never carry a gun. You can occasionally even find people who will say, I'd rather die than carry a gun. And that's all fine until you find them in an alley. Because when they're in an alley, when they're being raped, when they're being murdered, it's not a cocktail party discussion then. And you ask somebody, some giant liberal, because this happens every day in this country, you ask one of these liberal feminists who got a thing about guns, I don't know how many rapes occur in America every day, but it's more than one. You ask that person, that liberal progressive person, you ask them while they're being raped, whether or not they would like an armed citizen who's not a police officer to come in and prevent this, stop this right now. And I'll bet you every single one of them says, yes, please. Every single one of them. says, yes, please. Because then it's not academic, then it's not posturing, then it's not moral superiority, then it's not a cocktail party discussion. Now you are being murdered, or you are being raped, or your loved one is in front of your eyes, and then you ask somebody if an armed private conservative citizen would come into this alleyway with his gun and could put an end to this right now. Would you want him to, or would you rather continue to be raped to death? I'll bet you there's not one single person who will say, no, I'm enjoying being killed here. I'm enjoying being violated. I'm going to stand up for my principles and just let this guy bash my head against the stones, and my kids too, in front of my eyes. See, this is really where you get to brass tacks, right? This is where you really understand what liberals are. They're debaters, and they're posers, and they're cowards, and they're all these things, and they like to tell you what they would do, but they wouldn't. There's not one of them that wouldn't want somebody to save their life if their life was under assault. And this is where this is why we have to have these discussions at the point of contact. If a guy is coming down an alley to murder you, and he says, I'm going to bash your brains in, would you rather have a gun then, yes or no? Now, people in a cocktail party would say, never, I would rather die. You would rather die until it comes time to die, and then you wouldn't. And all these liberals who hate the military and despise the U.S. Marine Corps, I always think about this, all these cold pink lunatics were preventing people from signing up from the Marine Corps death machine. Fair enough. But if you find yourself in Cabo San Lucas one day on a lovely vacation out there whale watching, and you're suddenly abducted by Zetas, and they take a chainsaw and start taking the heads off of all of your friends from the community college in the art department, and they get to you, you start asking yourself whether or not you would want the U.S. Marine Corps to come in guns blazing and put an end to this? Yeah, okay. See, that's the difference between Code Pink and me. I don't have a point where my philosophy changes. You understand? There's no point in my life where any amount of threat or anything happens or might change my philosophy. My philosophy stays consistent from waking up in a nice warm bed in Sherman Oaks to finding myself on my knees in an orange jumpsuit with a guy with a black ski mask and a knife in his hand. My philosophy doesn't change anywhere in between there. It's consistent all the way through because it's based on reality. I think we ought to kill that guy while I'm sleeping in Sherman Oaks, and I also think we ought to kill that guy while I'm on my knees in an orange jumpsuit. It doesn't change. I don't get to be one guy at a cocktail party and then suddenly become another guy when I'm about to have my neck sawed off. Because I can imagine things, you see. I can see what this would be like. Elo Conson says, how are we doing on time here? We got about another 25 minutes. Elo Conson says, why are all such racist, sexist, bigoted, warmongering homophobes? But we're not. My answer to that would be, if a progressive said to me, why are you all such racist, sexist, bigoted, warmongering homophobes? My considered intellectual response would be, I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? Let's take them one by one. Racist. Am I a racist? Racism is the idea that your skin color determines your outcome. That if you're black, you're either likely to be a criminal, or maybe if you're black, you're automatically noble. I don't believe that at all. I believe in individuals. I'm the opposite of a racist. I agree with Martin Luther King. I agree 100% with Martin Luther King. And you will never hear, by the way, genuine racists say that. You'll never hear a person who's a member of the Ku Klux Klan say, I think Martin Luther King's idea was brilliant, or I think that Booker T. Washington was a philosophy that's so noble that I think he's one of the greatest Americans who ever lived. You won't hear a racist say that because they can't, because they genuinely hate black people because they're black. No, I think it's about individuality. I think the color, the content of our character rather than the color of their skin is the exact answer. And so I 100% agree with Martin Luther King on that statement. When Booker T. Washington says that it's through hard work that we will be achieved our equality through and respect through our efforts and not through their generosity, I couldn't agree with that more. That's a black man speaking. When I tell you I agree with Ben Carson, when I tell you that the smartest individual on planet Earth today is Thomas Sowell, that's a definition of not being a racist. You can't be a racist and make a statement like that. You just can't. You can't. You can't do it. A genuine racist cannot say the smartest person they know is a black philosopher named Thomas Sowell. It's not possible for them to do it. There's racism, sexism. Look, if you don't believe that there's a difference between the sexes, there's something cognitively wrong with you. Sexism is the is the belief that females, well, at least traditionally anyway, sexism is the belief that women are not as good as men and they should not be given full rights as men, that women should be denied property rights, that women should be denied the right to vote, that women should be denied equal pay. That's sexism. I don't believe in any of those things. I do believe that there's fundamental difference between men and women. And if you don't believe that, there's something wrong with you. And I don't mean something like morally wrong with you. If you don't understand that there's a biological difference between men and women's bodies in areas outside of sexuality, you need your head examined. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Do you know why they have women's categories in the Olympics? Do you know why there's women's 100-meter dash and women's high hurdles, and why there's women's weightlifting categories and women's volleyball? Do you know why? Because if there wasn't, there wouldn't be any women in the Olympics. Because at that level of physical achievement, there wouldn't be any women in the Olympics. As I've said before, it's shocking, but true. If you look at the time, the track time for the fastest woman alive, if you look at the most recent Olympics and you get the fastest time for the 100-meter dash, you will find that the fastest woman in the world is slower than most high school track stars, male track stars, and slower than virtually every college male track star. You think about that for a second. So that's not sexism. That's just reality. Sexism is saying because women in general are weaker than men, they should be treated worse than men. That's not what we believe at all. We believe that the conservative idea of manhood is because we're stronger than women and faster than them, we have an obligation to protect them. Is that sexist? I don't know. If you use that obligation to protect them to keep them down, to not allow them to have full rights, if you give them this kind of, hey, sweetheart, make me a sandwich kind of thing, then that is sexism. But I don't believe that for a second. I've worked for women most of my life. I think the liberation of women in terms of their abilities as human beings is the great achievement of the modern Western world. You really actually look at these people in countries like Iran or Saudi Arabia. You've cut out half your talent. You want to compete with half your talent tied up? And don't you find it interesting that it's the conservatives who are most opposed to these regimes that actually genuinely do put women in sacks and say, you may have been a doctor before we came along, but now you cannot leave the house unless you have a male relative with you. You can't have a driver's license. We're the ones who oppose those people, not the progressives. Progressives think they're swell. The progressives think that they're just terrific. The progressives think that the Palestinians and all of their anti-women Islamic nonsense are the good guys, and the Israelis that have a completely sex-neutral society, which was run by Golda Meir and so on. The idea of a woman leading the PLO or the women leading Hamas, do you really think that's going to happen? It's not. But Golda Meir was a tremendous war president for Israel. So once again, we're on the right side, and once again, they're on the wrong side, which is why they have to launch these attacks. So that's sexist. Bigoted, what's bigoted? What does that mean? Bigoted, I judge people as individuals. I don't judge them by skin color. I don't assume that all black people are bad because they're black, and I don't think that they're all good because they're black either. I don't talk about white skin privilege. There are some white people who are motivated to work hard, and there are some white people who are lazy as can be and blame their troubles on everybody else. Likewise for blacks, likewise for Hispanics, likewise for Asians, and so on. I judge people as individuals. I'm not bigoted. I don't prejudge anybody, but I am capable of discrimination. And when you talk to progressives, they think that discrimination is automatically bad. Discrimination is the ability to tell that one thing is better than something else. If you look at the statue of David and you compare it to a mask that's hacked out of a piece of wood and you say these are both equal, there's something wrong with you. They're not both equal, and the reason they're not both equal is because which one of these things do you think you could make a passable copy of? Is that racism? How's it racism? I didn't say that a black person can't make that statue. I just said that that statue is better than that piece of tribal art. It's better. It may not be more noble or morally, but it's certainly harder to do. That's the ability to discriminate something better than something else. Is that a sign of mental illness? No. Look, I don't care what you think about me, frankly. Honestly, really get right down to it, progressives. I really don't care what you think about me. The only thing I care about is it true? Is it true? If it's true, that's where I'm going. And if it's something that's true that's unpleasant, I better understand why it's true if I'm going to try to do something about the unpleasantness. So, warmongering, I'll say this about warmongering, okay? Yeah, there are times when being a warmonger is exactly what you need. When you are facing evil people with guns who want to come and kill all the stupid people, like the progressives who call you a warmonger, then what you basically find is that conservatives are ready to die to protect liberal stupidity. And it doesn't work the other way around. Liberals want the society disarmed against foreign invasion and against criminal predation. So if you listen to the liberals, both the liberals and the conservatives will be dead. If you listen to conservatives, both the conservatives and the liberals will stay alive. Conservative children go to the armed forces and go overseas and get killed defending liberal children's right to be idiots. That's actual moral superiority, not imagined moral superiority. And then the final one is homophobes. Listen, the word homophobe means afraid of homosexuals. If there's one group in the world that don't generate genuine fear, I put them pretty high. What is this homophobia thing? A great many conservatives have religious beliefs that tell them that same-sex coupling is a sin. It's not just a crime, it's a sin. They didn't write the Bible, they just believe in it. So, whether or not you think it's a sin, that's fine, that's your business. And the essence of a conservative idea is that people should be left alone. Now, this is where I differ with some people in the conservative movement. I certainly think that gay people have a right to get married. I have no problem with that. I think you can marry your lawn chair. I really don't care. Because what these people do doesn't affect my life. However, what you often find in the gay rights movement is not just a desire for legal protection, but an enforcement of acceptance. You can't enforce acceptance on somebody, and you cannot make somebody violate the tenets of their religion. That's what this whole thing is about. So I just say get the coercion out of it and let people do what they want to do. It's entirely up to you. You want to marry two gay people? I really don't care. I was when I was in Gainesville, I went back. I had a housemate who was gay. He was a great guy. I shared an apartment with him. We had separate bedrooms. I'm not dead yet. You never know. But we had separate bedrooms, and I decided to room with this guy because he was a smart, funny, talented, responsible, decent human being. And I wasn't threatened by this. I've been around the theater since I was 15. I've been a theater major, and I've been around actors and theater since I was 15, 16. I've been around gay people all my life. I find them, as a general rule, to be extremely kind, very, very good, decent, honorable people who wouldn't hurt a fly. Just wouldn't hurt a fly. And their sexual activity doesn't particularly repulse me because I don't think about it. It doesn't enter my radar. It's not something I think about. There are some people who have an attitude about homosexuals who've got to beat up the fags. It's like, you're really trying to beat up the inner fag, aren't you? Really kind of trying to beat up the fag inside that you're really afraid to face. Those kind of people I have a problem with. Those kind of genuine homophobes I have a real problem with. But I don't have those feelings. If you ask me, do I think a gay couple can raise a child better than an abusive straight couple? Categorically, I believe that. But I also think that this fundamental maleness and femaleness is built into the creature. And that's why I think a straight, married, loving couple is the best way to raise children. It's not the only way. I think it's the best way. And I genuinely believe that a man and a woman married raise better boys and girls than two men or two women. Because both boys and girls need the difference. They need the difference, and the difference is there. They need to understand the balance of the difference, and they take the balance in different ways, but they need it both. And I'm not saying that a gay couple can't raise a kid without love or without anything else. I just don't think it's quite as good a job. Now, look, I could be talked out of this. Maybe I'm wrong. It's possible I'm wrong about this one, but I don't think I am. But ultimately, it's not my business. It's just not my business. I just don't care. So how can I be a homophobe if I just don't care? I don't care. And I think really ultimately this is kind of where this whole homophobia thing comes at. It's so stale. It's so 1970s. It's like so 68, 69, 70. It's like, well, I guess you're just can't handle the fact that I'm gay. Not only can I handle the fact that you're gay, I'm actually pretty bored with the fact that this is your identity. Really? That's your identity? That? Okay. I'm a gay man in the Air Force. Well, why can't you just be a man in the Air Force? What's this all about? I'm not shocked. I'm not shocked. I'm not mortified. I'm not taken aback. I'm not knocked off my perch. I'm not any of that stuff. I don't care. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I don't care. What kind of person are you? Are you a good person? Are you brave? Are you courageous? Do you do the right thing? Do you step up? Do you contribute? What kind of person are you? That's what I'm interested in. And if conservatism is the idea of individuality, then all of these things are just plain not true. They're not true. I'm not a racist because I don't believe in race determines behavior. I think individual choices determine behavior. I'm not a sexist because I don't think men are automatically good or automatically bad. I say, is it a good person, a bad person, good man, good woman, bad woman? What is the individual doing? And take it all the way down the line. And some people need some warmongering done to them. They need some warmongering. ISIS needs a little warmongering done to them. And as I said in that speech, the problem with this coexist bumper sticker and the reason conservatives groan is because we're not the ones who need to learn how to coexist. The people in this society have the coexist bumper stickers to teach us about how to coexist. We're already coexisting. The fact that we're in America means we're coexisting. The fact that I'm not blowing your head off because you have a coexist bumper sticker on your car means that I'm already able to coexist. I don't need you lecturing me and telling me how to coexist. I actually have a much more high tolerance of other people's viewpoints than you do. The place where you need the coexist bumper stickers are in Iran and Russia. And they don't have them there. They're the ones who need to coexist, and they don't. They're the ones that are aggressive. They're the ones that are doing the invading. They're the ones who need our side to be ammoed up for. Hopefully that helped you out there, Aloe Conson. You have about 10 minutes left. Zechariah Tiemans says, why do you think that capitalism is moral if it means that someone who needs something but can't afford it will be deprived? How can you justify a rich person owning 4 separate houses when he only needs one, and there are millions of homeless people out on the streets? Well, let's just start with that ridiculous idea that he only needs one. It's true he only needs one. How many songs do you have on your iPod there, Mr. Progressive D-bag hipster who knows all the latest tunes? How many songs do you have on your iPad? On your iPod or on your iPhone? Hundreds? Thousands? Do you really need that much music? Aren't there people in the world who don't have music? Why do you need 700 songs on your iPad? I keep saying iPad. On your iPod. Why do you need 700 songs on your playlist when you really only need a couple songs? Maybe a song of country music and a song of classical music, or 2 maybe. Why do you need so many songs? Why do you need 700 songs? Why do you need 4,000 songs? Why do you need so many songs? You don't need that many songs, do you? What about the people who don't have any music? Or is it that the fact that you have 4,000 songs on a device this big makes your life enjoyable? Is that why you have 4,000 songs, young hipster, who's sitting in Starbucks on an Apple computer crying about capitalism? Is that it? I suspect the reason you've got so many songs on your magical device, which was not created by government bureaucracies but by businessmen in it for profit, I suspect that the reason you have so many songs is because you like listening to music, and that on some level you work for a living, and the money that you earn in exchange for doing something that you may not like, you dedicate to owning things that you like. In this case, it's tunes. Maybe it's 99 cents, but no one's telling you when you've had enough music, right? No one says, hey, you've had enough music. No more music for you. The money that you would have spent on iTunes this month, off to the poor it goes. You don't get to tell people when they've had enough of anything. People have a right to whatever they want to do with the money that they make on their own, because money is not an independent thing like bread or something. Money is simply an exchange for the work that you've done. So if you sweat or you think or you work or you get up or you do something unpleasant that you didn't want to do and somebody gives you money for it, you've already paid for your end of it. That's yours. You've already paid. They don't usually pay you first and do the work later. Occasionally they do. That's why Hollywood's so corrupt. But basically, you've already done 2 weeks of labor as a telephone lineman, or 2 weeks of labor as a dishwasher, or two weeks of labor working at Walmart, and then they give you money. And you've already earned it. You've paid for it. You've sweat for it. It's yours. What you do with that money is your damn business and nobody else's. Nobody else's. Money didn't come from the money fairy. Money didn't come out of the ground and you stole stuff that belonged to somebody else. If you have more than somebody else, you're either working harder or longer, or you have a skill set that somebody doesn't have. And that other person can get a skill set. Maybe not the same skill set as Ben Carson, but a better skill set than they have now. They don't do it, though. So when you say somebody's got too many houses, ask them how many songs they are allowed to have. Ask them when there's too much music in their iPad. I keep saying iPad. What the hell's the matter with me? It's because I don't have an iPod. I have an iPhone. When you've had too many devices, when you have too much music in your devices, let me know. How many video games are too many games? When do we know that you've had enough video games? Do you have already a video game on your Xbox? Yeah? Well, what do you need another one for? Why do you need a second video game? Why do you need a second video game console? Nobody asks these questions, do they? Because if you ask a teenager or somebody who says you've got 4 houses, you only need one, you've got 40 video games, you only need one. In fact, you don't need any video games. So why do you have more than one? Why didn't you spend the money for the additional video games and give it to poor people? Why didn't you do that? Why? Why didn't you spend the money that you spent on iPhone or iTunes downloads? Why didn't you give that money to poor people? Why? Is it because the entire idea of being human is to make a sacrifice in exchange for pleasure? Isn't that basically what consciousness is, right? Of course it is. And all these progressive swine want to do is they want to demonize people who make different choices than them. It's not even that progressives voluntarily are these sort of ascetic kind of hermits who do these things, because even then they'd still have no right to tell a guy who works hard that he has to give up his house. But they don't have that kind of discipline or that kind of integrity. They spend their money on themselves and get as many of the things as they want. They just don't like it when other people spend their money on other things, especially when they have more money than they do. The reason they have more money than you do, young progressive loser, is instead of sitting around and monitoring who's got what and who has how much and how many, they're out there actually working. They're actually working. It's harder to work than it is to bitch about working. There's a line I had that I never really thought of before, just kind of came to me in the moment in Dallas. But basically, it's much easier to tax a business than it is to run a business. And if you understand that, that's all you need to know about progressives. It's easier to take somebody else's stuff than it is to go make your own. Much easier. Much easier. Does anybody think Barack Obama would be traveling around in a 747 if he had to go out and earn the money to pay for a 747 on his own? I know some wealthy, wealthy, wealthy people. I know some extremely rich people. I have heard of people that have an A380, but I've never heard of anybody that had a 4-engine jumbo jet at his disposal, let alone 2. So how does Joe Biden, who not only couldn't run Walmart, but couldn't run a Walmart, how does he get to travel around in limousines? Joe Biden's never paid anything in 40 years. Never reached for his wallet in 40 years. How did he get to do it? It's easier to take other people's money than it is to make your own. It's easier to commandeer it. And that's what they want to defend. They want to defend the idea of stealing other people's money. And so finally what you're really left with is this. You're ultimately left with this idea about capitalism. Well, if you have the ability to get rich, then some people are going to get richer than others. Yes, that's true. But everybody is better than they would have been before. They're better off than they would have been before. I know I repeat myself sometimes in the show, but we've done 79 of them. You're going to have to cover some of the ground over again. Some of you haven't heard this before. There's a thought experiment that I like very much, and I think we'll probably call it here. And and I like it very much. I came up with this on my own. Let's say that you work in an insurance company, and let's say that you're in a cubicle along with 100 other people who work for the same insurance company, and let's say that you've been there 25 years, and let's say that on a Friday, at the very end of the day, the president of the company walks up with the chief financial officer and says to you, Bill, can we have a moment of your time? And you think, my God, what have I done? And the president and the CFO quietly lean in and say, Bill, you put 25 years of hard work into this company, and we've been watching and we knew it. You've taken your pay and you've been great, and you've done everything we asked you for. You stepped up. You did more than was asked of you. You've made this company a big success. We're very, very proud of you. We've noticed, even though you didn't think we have. So in exchange for the hard work that you've done, which we've already paid you for, we would like to present you, with the taxes already paid on it, a check for $100,000 as a small token of our appreciation over the years. And somebody hands you a check for $100,000 that you were not expecting in the least. It's not like this money is spent. It is an absolute 100% total, genuine windfall. It came out of the sky. And they shake your hands and they walk away, and you're left in the booth. What do you do if you said, what would you do if you suddenly had a check for $100,000 that you weren't expecting? What would you do? You'd instantly start to think about all of the wonderful things you could do. My God, $100,000, tax paid for already, mind you. What could I do? Well, I guess I could pay off all my bills and never have to worry about those things anymore. And I could get a nicer car, or maybe the car I always wanted, or I've always wanted to take a trip around the world. I put the money into my kids' vacation or holidays or education or whatever. And you sit there filled with joy because of all the things you're able to do with this newfound wealth that you didn't have before. Now to the point. So you get up from your little cubicle in your insurance company, and you walk out into the middle of the floor, and you say, everybody, I don't mean to brag, but I just have to share this with somebody. I can't believe what happened. What? The president of the company and the COO came over and told me that as a result of my hard work, he just gave me a check for $100,000. Do you believe that? Isn't that great? And everybody looks at you and they said, he was just here with all of us just a few moments ago, but he gave all of us a check for $500,000. Now you're at the place where progressives spend all of their time. Because me, as a conservative, I spend my time 10 seconds before that announcement is made. I look at gains and wealth and opportunity as a net gain for me. How much better off am I relative to where I was just a few minutes ago? But when you find out, just think about how that makes you feel, because we all feel this way. We're not immune to it. I just got $100,000, and everybody else says, well, we all got $500,000. Now where are you? Are you in a place of happiness and joy? No, you're not. You're no longer thinking about what you could accomplish with that $100,000. You're no longer thinking about all the things you could buy with that $100,000. What you're thinking about is what you could have bought with $500,000. That's what you're doing. You're wondering why you didn't get the $500,000. And all of that pride that you felt a few moments ago when somebody said, here's an extra $100,000 for all the work you've done, now all of a sudden you're filled with anger and envy and shame and resentment and all of that stuff. How come I only got $100,000? How come Susie, who comes in late, who's an absolute complete idiot, just complete moron, I do half of her work anyway. She gets $500,000, I only get $100,000. What kind of fair is that? Dave's an alcoholic. He sleeps at his desk. He gets $500,000, I only get $100,000. And listen to the language that you start to use. I only get $100,000 that I wasn't expecting before. I only get $100,000. That's how it works. That's envy. That's covetousness, as Amendment 10 points out. Covetousness, I suppose is the word. That's the human heart. That's the human condition. That's why we're fault-driven, flawed creatures. That's why we're not angels. That's why we can't be trusted to do the right thing, because that gene is built into us. There's a reason for it. It's there. Squirrels have this reaction. Everybody has this reaction to unfair distribution of wealth and resources. And to cap this off, Let me tell you why this works, and this is why progressives continuously fail to understand what we believe, and they cannot for the life of us understand why we would not be envious of people having more than us. Here's why. It's because it's a gift. It's because it's unearned. It's because it's unrelated to output. That's why people are envious. They assume that money is a giant psychic vat of luck that is distributed unfairly among people. And because it's not earned, because it's just the luck of the draw, if this guy has 4 houses, I'm envious of him because he got something for free that I should have gotten an equal share of. They don't understand that the reason he's got 4 houses is because he works harder than you. Now, some people say, are you trying to tell me that an exec works harder than a person who scrubs toilets 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day? On some level, maybe they don't. But they certainly work more valuably. They create more wealth than a person who scrubs a toilet. And a person who scrubs a toilet 10 hours a day are not the kind of people, generally speaking, who are filled with resentment and envy. By the way, a guy who scrubs a toilet 10 hours a day, and that's all he knows how to do, if he's very, very good at scrubbing his toilet, I'm not about to say he's going to get rich by scrubbing toilets, but I will tell you that if he's a guy who scrubs toilets and he has a little bit of the same kind of vision that the guy with the 4 houses has, he can say to himself, I do an excellent job with janitorial services, and there's a need for excellent janitorial services in the world today. So even though all I know how to do is scrub toilets, I'm going to find somebody who knows how to set up a business, and we are going to set up a janitorial service that's going to provide excellent janitorial services at a low, reasonable price, and we're going to be reliable, and we're going to be clean, and we're going to be friendly, and we're going to be price competitive, and that guy's going to be a millionaire, that guy who's scrubbing toilets. He's going to be a millionaire. But back to the thing. Because it's a gift, that's why people envy it. Here's a gift for $100,000. Woohoo! Everybody else got $500,000. What? If it had been based on merit, then you would have said, okay, I got $100,000 for free. That no good for nothing Johnson got $500,000, but Johnson does come in every day at 6, and Johnson does stay till 9:30 every day, and I do hear that Johnson comes in on weekends. I came in on weekends twice in the last 10 years, and both times Johnson was here working. Johnson does, in fact, put in these insane hours, many more hours than I'd ever want to. Johnson's a workaholic lunatic. He doesn't even have a life. But if it was based on that kind of merit, you would be able to understand that Johnson got more money than you because Johnson works harder than you do. You'd be on some level, okay, it would have a certain justice to it. But the reason people retch when they hear you were given $100,000, yes, we all got $500,000. Now, you not only have the lack of resources that everybody else had, you're no longer comparing to what you were, you're comparing to what other people have or what you could be doing. But then there's also a negative connotation attached to it, right? You got less than everybody else because you're not good as anybody else. There's something they don't like. Maybe people don't like you. Is that why you only got $100,000? What did I do wrong? See what I mean? But the point is people can make themselves sick over being $100,000 richer than they were 5 minutes before. And this is the essence of envy, and it's the essence of progressivism. It's the looking at what other people have rather than looking at what you have. How are you doing? And poor people in America are richer than 93% of the planet. Am I supposed to be ashamed of the fact that the poorest Americans are richer than 97% of the rest of the planet? Am I supposed to be ashamed of this? I'm bloody proud of it. Am I supposed to be ashamed of the fact that the poorest Americans' biggest health problems they have is obesity? There've never been fat poor people before America. And am I supposed to somehow have a problem with the fact that that maybe rich people have some amenities that most people have? You know, I don't know what the percentage is now. I looked it up about 10 years ago, not even 3, 4, 5 years ago. But it's something like 97% of all Americans have air conditioning and 93% of poor people have air conditioning. It's those kind of numbers all the way down the board with refrigerators, cars, cell phones, everything else. Look, 100 years ago, as I like to say, when I'm on the road, if I went to an event 100 years ago and I was the richest man in America 100 years ago, I'd show up in a carriage with 4 horses on it, probably 2, 4 if I wanted to show off, and if I was really trying to make a big impression, I mean a major impression, I might show up to an event as the richest man in America in a carriage drawn by 8 horses. Today, I am a long way from being the richest man in America, but everywhere I go, I'm in a carriage drawn by 360 horses. My life is in every way better than the richest American who lived 100 years ago, and so is the poorest American. The poorest American today lives a life that's infinitely better than the richest American 100 years ago. How can you say that? Well, I'll tell you how I can say it. Poor Americans today have air conditioning. Rich Americans 100 years ago did not have air conditioning. Poor Americans today have electricity in every room and running water in every room. They have toilets in every room. Most rich people didn't have that 200 years ago. 300 years ago, certainly none of them did. Right? And so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. But the poorest American today, if he has a toothache or needs a root canal or whatever, he will get dental care, whether he may not end up paying for it, maybe just comped him. But he will have Novocaine, and he'll have antibiotics administered to him, and he'll have x-rays, and all these other things that he's going to get. Doesn't matter how much money he's got, because if he's sick, he's going to be treated in America. You don't leave guys out on the street with broken limbs. You don't see it because it doesn't happen. So the poorest American today gets the kind of medical treatment that the richest American 100 years ago could not possibly imagine. So when people say to me, well, gee, Bill, you got all these privileges, it's like, first of all, I didn't inherit any money from anybody, number one. Number two, if I had, it would have been somebody else's work that was being passed down to me. My ancestors at the time of slavery in America were working in textile mills in Lancashire, cotton carding, and they couldn't just get up and decide to move to Aruba. They were pretty much as attached to that life as anybody else were. And prior to that, we were coal miners, is where we come from. Right? So I'm not a coal miner today, not because of the luck fairy. I'm not a coal miner today because my grandparents and great-grandparents decided to work harder than they needed to as coal miners and textile workers to get their children educated and to give them this white skin privilege, which is nothing other than an attitude. It's an attitude. It's the attitude of planning, delayed gratification. It's the attitude of investing in things now so that you get more of a benefit later. All of this stuff, this is what it is. It's nothing, and it's not restricted to white people. It's not restricted to males. It's not restricted to anybody. It's available to all. And this is why we're conservatives, because we understand the truth of this. It's just that simple. So would I rather live in a country where everybody else gets 500 grand, but I get 100 grand? Absolutely. If I were to say to you tomorrow, would you take a check for $100,000 if it meant that everybody else in your office got a check for $500,000? If you don't take it, there's something wrong with you. I mean, there's something emotionally and wrong with you. But there are people out there, and we all know them, there are people out there who would say, who are so filled with envy and loathing and resentment, there are people out there where if the deal was everybody takes the check or nobody gets the check, there are some people out there who would be so appalled by the fact that other people were getting 500 grand and all they got was a measly 100 grand that they'd tear that check up. There's some people like that. They call them progressives. They're small-minded, small-hearted, venal, nasty, envious, tiny little people with rotten, constricted, shriveled little emotional cores that cannot handle other people's success and only look at what other people are doing rather than whether or not they're doing better than they were before. Because if you look at whether somebody's doing better than they were before, capitalism's the way to go. Churchill said capitalism is the unequal spreading of wealth and socialism is the equal spreading of misery, something along those lines. There you go. But some people would rather all be sitting in the mud than have a nice house and look at somebody who had a better house. Final thing I'll say about this one thing, and we're done for the night. I'm going to mangle this too. There's an old Russian proverb, and the Russians ought to know because of all the people that have envy built into them. It's the Russians, and it's because the Russians have had so little mobility. Hard work has been... it won't do you any good in Russia or the Soviet Union. But apparently it's an old Russian proverb, and it says all you need to know. And again, I'm going to mangle it a little bit, but you get the gist of it, right? And this old Russian proverb says there are these two peasants, and they live on opposite sides of a dirt road in a village, and they hate each other. They just hate each other. And when I say they're poor, They're poor. They're sticking a sharp stick in the mud and they're dropping in seeds and they're just living in the muck and they're barely able to grow enough shriveled potatoes to get them through one more frozen winter of misery, and they're covered with fleas and ticks and parasites, and life is hell. Life is hell. And this one peasant gets down on his knees and prays every day, and he's a great Christian, prays every day, prays every day, prays every day, prays for a cow. Just prays for a cow, so the cow, give him milk, give him cheese, the cow can pull a plow. Prays for the cow, prays and prays and prays. Finally, one day, there's a shaft of sunlight and this guy gets a cow. So now the other guy's across the street and he sees that his neighbor's got the cow. So he gets down on his knees and prays every day and prays 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 and prays. Prays just as hard as that other guy did. And finally the archangel Gabriel appears and says, you have, through your dedication and holiness, earned yourself one wish. And the second peasant says, I want you to kill that man's cow. And that's it, right? That's it. That's all you need to know. I want you to take away their prosperity because they've got more than I do and I don't want to work for mine. You got to turn this around on people. They're not morally superior. They're morally inferior. They're weaklings and they're lazy. They're lazy. They're lazy people, and they envy other people's stuff because they don't have the guts, the gumption, the hard work, the talent, the drive, or the sheer, plain discipline to get up and work hard enough to get their own stuff. I don't ever worry about how much money somebody else has. I worry about how much money I have, and if I want to live in 4 houses, I don't try to say that guy can't live in 4 houses. I say, what do I have to do in order to live in 4 houses? If that's really what I want, what do I have to do? That's it. So we didn't even get through one of the 6 pages. We'll probably end up doing 5 of these things. I love these things. They're great questions. They're really fun to do. They're not exactly pithy answers. I can probably get them pithier if I had more time. But they at least hopefully go to the substratum, the philosophical argument of why all this stuff makes sense. And I think, as I said before, I think we did a 3-parter. I know we did a 3-parter. We might have done a 4-parter. I'm going to do these questions till we run out of questions. So there'll definitely be a part 2 and almost certainly a part 3. In any event, man, look at the time. I got to run. But as always, it's a pleasure to do the Stratosphere Lounge. And as a person who works hard, I can't, as I say, can't ever end these shows without thanking the people who work hard enough and then take some of that extra work and extra sweat and send it my way through these memberships, especially the members. It allows us to develop movies. It allows me to move to a even higher level of output and work, and hopefully we can do some good to change the country, and hopefully I can do some good for me and my goals in my personal life. So for those of you who support us just through Facebook and everything else, thank you. Those of you who support me financially, thank you very much. And I know many of you want to and can't, and I certainly understand that. I totally do. Believe me, if there's anybody in the world who understands that, it's the guy who had to decide whether to pay his rent or his electric bill. I get it. But anyway, thank you one way or another. And thanks for being with us for episode 79. Next will be episode 80. I ran into somebody on the road in Dallas who said they've archived everything, and it's something like 230 hours of total time, 230 hours of the Stratosphere Lounge, something like that. You know, you take 230 hours or something, there's going to be a solid 4 or 5 minutes in there somewhere. I feel pretty good about that. So we'll pick it up again next time. It's the 3rd of September, 2014. Onward we go into the darkness. We just have to make our own light. Helvectron, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.